best wishes, warmest regards. So, as an unwindy sort of show that I watch when I want something on that doesn't require a lot of my attention but will also be pleasant, I've started watching Schitt's Creek, which is a show that I did not realize had as many seasons as it does. I remember hearing about it a couple years ago and generally thinking, oh, Eugene Levy on TV. Interesting. That was about as much thought as I gave to it. But it's surprisingly well done. And when I say surprisingly, I mean strictly speaking to my tastes. Because it feels like the kind of thing that I should dislike. And I actually had to think for a bit about what it does that makes it work for me. I am picky about comedy in general, sitcoms in particular, because they have a tendency to lean on styles of comedy that just don't work for me. I've flat out been accused of being a comedy snob by friends in the past. But with this, despite the fact that we're basically watching characters kind of metaphorically get the crap beaten out of them over and over and over again and are frequently embarrassed and humiliated, it doesn't irk me the way cringe style humor usually does. I've talked before about how anything that's based around humiliation, embarrassment, or attempting to get a reaction out of the audience to be like, it tends to really rub me the wrong way. I really tend to dislike it, like deeply, to my core. But this almost never set off that reaction for me. I think the reason why not is twofold. First is, it really helps that the Rose family, which is the primary family this all rotates around, is they're uniformly terrible people. So that helps a little bit in that I am not going to feel as bad for them when it comes to them getting their comeuppance. I suppose a little context for anyone who doesn't already watch the show. This deals with the Rose family, which is made up of Johnny, Moira, that's the patriarch and matriarch respectively, and their kids, Alexis and David. They were massively rich. Their business partner basically absconded with all of their viable finances, and because their business partner was also cheating on taxes, everything else is getting claimed by the government. They now have nothing except for one town in the middle of nowhere that called Schitt's Creek, which John bought as a joke gift for David. He bought the town as a joke, deed to the whole town. And that was the one thing the government didn't reclaim because as far as they were concerned, it was worthless. So they now live in this town and are trying to figure out how to sell it to somebody else. And they obviously have no business being anywhere and that is anything like this. So like I said, sort of step one is the fact that these are people who kind of deserve to be taken down a few pegs. Because for me, when humiliation humor is at its worst is when it is being subjected onto people who it feels like life has already been kicking them for a lot of their time on this planet. And I feel like that happens way, way, way too often. And I really hate that. But it's not just that. I realized something towards the end of the first season, which is that it actually has a tendency to skip over what would be the most cringe-inducing scenes. Not always, but a decent amount of time. They will set up a scene, and you know what's going to happen, but then they'll jump to the end and kind of wrap up, yeah, so that happened. So like a character saying, I'm gonna have to break this news to this person, and you know it's gonna be an awkward, terrible, painful, humiliating conversation. And like that's another thing about a lot of humiliation and cringe humor is that it really draws it out. It makes you watch this slow motion train crash. Whereas this show has a tendency to set up what's going to happen, and rather than make you sit there and watch through the thing that you know what's going to happen and watch it play out exactly the way that you know that it is and have it be painful every step of the way, jumps to the end so that it establishes, okay, yeah, so that happened. And rather than having to watch the crash in slow motion, you get like a news update at the end. Yes, so there was a crash and here was the outcome. Like, oh, okay. And as someone who doesn't really enjoy slow motion train crashes, that helps a lot. I don't know if this metaphor is in poor taste or not. Anyways, moving along. So I ended up really enjoying something that I thought was going to rub me the wrong way. And also it helps that all the performances are really good. Almost all. There's one character I don't really care for, but even he's not terrible. It's not like Cobra Kai with characters like Dimitri and Raymond, who I'm like, get off the show! There's nobody like that. So there is, obviously Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara as Moira and John they've worked together a ton. They know how to bounce off each other. Moira can be a bit much. And that's hard to say that's a fault, because that's kind of her character. She's a bit much. That's who she is. That's what she does. But there are times when she gets really worked up or shrieky that I'm like, can we move on to somebody else? The kids are a lot of fun. Alexis is quite amusing, just because she is so self-absorbed that she is oblivious to almost anything else going on. And she plays it really, really well. And then there's David, played by Daniel Levy, Eugene Levy's son, who's also a co-creator on the show. And he's really good. Again, managing to do something that normally wouldn't work for me. Because his character's pansexual, but his mannerisms lean kind of in the area of somewhat stereotypical, slightly effeminate, maybe a little bit foppish, kind of bitchy gay man, is his mannerisms. Even though the character, as I said, is established to be pansexual. In a conversation that I absolutely love, it ends up being used as a metaphor with wine, as this woman who he has now slept with, she says, so, I drink red wine, and I thought you drank red wine. And David goes, well, I do, but I also sometimes drink white wine, or occasionally have a rosé. Or one time I tried a Merlot that used to be a Cabernet, and that was a little complicated. And, that's just a great conversation. But anyway, my point originally, tangenting as I tend to do, was that despite his mannerisms being kind of stereotypically coded queer, and I generally don't, I understand, but I have a hard time swallowing the cover story of, well, that's what the actor really is like. I'm like, then it'd be nice if they act a little and don't just behave the way they do day to day. But I think a big part of it is he is very subdued. He's not shrill. He has those mannerisms. He has that sense of who he is without being flamboyant and, he's none of those things. And I think just removing the most shrill, most abrasive aspects of the more stereotypical mannerisms to a queer male character, and suddenly I'm able to roll with it a heck of a lot better. Which I think says a lot about the fact that it may not be these mannerisms in and of themselves that rub me the wrong way. It's how dialed up they are. They're almost never there in any degree that could be vaguely called subtle or as a background character element. They're always shoved to the forefront. Not so much with David. And again, he is wonderfully snarky. His best stuff is banter with the character who runs the motel where the Roses are living at, whose name's Stevie. Stevie's probably my favorite character. Stevie, just sarcasm to the level of poetry. It's amazing. And her interacting with David is especially great. That's fantastic stuff. And it's a really solid supporting cast as well. There are some people with the last name Schitts in Schitt's Creek. There's the mayor, who's played by Chris Elliott, kind of doing his standard slightly off-putting thing that he's pretty much always done. And he's still good for that, but like it's never a characterization I was ever super into. I find his wife, Jocelyn, to be actually quite fascinating. She might be the closest thing to a normal person that we see, and yet she clearly has still been affected by being around these other people. And there's a number of... Twyla. Twyla's a lot of fun. Twyla manages to be... She's an airhead without being... again, lacking any of the stereotypical mannerisms I would expect out of kind of an airheaded female character. So, again, this show's just good at taking a character template that I normally don't like and messing with it just enough that it makes it work. I mentioned the one character I don't really care for, and that's Mutt, who is a character that Alexis kind of gets tied up in. And I think the big issue for me with Mutt is that a lot of his purpose and his interactions with the characters seem to be driven by this idea that he is somehow inherently sexy. And no. And I'm not saying he must be sexy to me. I'm sure some people do find him sexy. I'm sorry, I just don't. But aside from that, he doesn't really have a lot of a personality. It would be fine if like they were pushing the idea that he's sexy and he isn't, because like I can still roll with it. Like Alexis has to be attracted to him, not me, and I buy that she makes bad choices, but he's so hollow as a kid. There's like nothing there. And I think they try and make that a character trait, like that he's kind of lazy and unambitious and this sort of stuff, but like none of it feels like character traits. It just feels like an empty character, as opposed to, again, to compare to someone like Twyla, who does not have a lot going on behind her eyes, but still feels like a character. Mutt just doesn't. He just kind of takes up space. He's very wooden. He's very hollow and wooden. Again, not to the point that he grates on me, but it's just like, yeah, you're not contributing a lot to this. But the episodes are short. They're funny. It knows how to make good use of this cast and of these characters. This was surprisingly fun. As someone who rarely enjoys traditional sitcoms, which this is ultimately fairly traditional sitcom in terms of its setup and a lot of the scenarios for any given episode. But it's good. I liked it. Plan to keep going with it. Schitt's Creek, Season 1. You watch it. What do you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon, which is how I'm able to afford to pay my bills. It keeps this whole operation up and running. Any amount you're able to give me there is great help. But even if you can't, like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. But no pressure for any of it, because I take a relaxed attitude around here. So you can just feel free to come on back next time I need a break.